Did you think your winter was tough? Ever wondered how people survived freezing temperatures without central heating? Could you handle a medieval winter with no electricity, no insulation, and no Gore-Tex? Number 11. They slept together literally. When temperatures plummeted in medieval Europe, personal space became a luxury no one could afford. Entire families, parents, children, grandparents, and even servants would sleep in the same bed or at least in the same room. This wasn't about family bonding, it was straight-up survival. Body heat was a precious resource that nobody wasted. Medieval peasant homes typically consisted of just 1 or 2 rooms. At night, everyone would huddle together on straw mattresses or pallets on the floor. Family members would pile in like sardines, sharing blankets and body warmth. Livestock sometimes joined the arrangement too. Cows, goats, pigs, and chickens would be brought inside the home during the coldest nights. These animals generated significant heat, and keeping them alive was essential for the family's survival. Privacy? What privacy? The concept barely existed in medieval peasant households. When the choice was between modesty and freezing to death, people quickly chose warmth. Multiple generations sleeping side by side became normal during winter months. Children would sleep between adults for maximum warmth, with the oldest and youngest family members positioned closest to the heat source since they were most vulnerable to the cold. This communal sleeping arrangement continued well into the early modern period. Even as late as the 17th century, it wasn't uncommon for travelers to share beds with complete strangers at inns. The practice of multiple people sharing a bed only gradually disappeared as heating technology improved and social norms around privacy developed. Number 10. They dressed in layers all day, all night. Ever sleep in your clothes? Medieval peasants didn't just do it occasionally, they practically lived in their garments. During winter, they rarely undressed completely, even for sleep. Layers were their primary defense against the bitter cold. Peasant winter clothing wasn't fancy, but it was functional. The foundation was linen undergarments, which absorbed sweat and provided a base layer. Over this came wool, lots and lots of wool. Wool tunics, wool leggings, wool cloaks, wool hoods. Wool was the medieval miracle fabric. Even when wet, wool continues to insulate, making it perfect for the damp European winters. For those who could afford it, fur linings provided excellent insulation. Even humble peasants might have fur-lined cloaks or hats made from rabbit, squirrel, or other locally available animals. Nothing went to waste. Animal skins from food sources doubled as clothing materials. Feet got special attention. Cold feet could lead to frostbite and permanent disability. Peasants wrapped their feet in strips of cloth before putting on leather shoes. Wealthier peasants might have wooden clogs with straw padding for trudging through snow. Straw was stuffed everywhere, inside mittens, hats, and shoes for extra insulation. Hats were not optional. Since body heat escapes readily through the head, peasants wore various caps, hoods, and head coverings day and night during winter. Women wore wimples that covered their heads, necks, and chins, while men donned woolen caps. Many peasants slept wearing their daytime hats or special nightcaps. The clothing rarely got washed during winter. The natural oils that built up in woolen garments actually improved their water resistance and insulating properties. What might seem unsanitary to modern sensibilities was actually a practical adaptation to harsh conditions. Number 9. They engineered smart houses with what they had. Medieval peasant homes weren't architectural masterpieces, but they were built with winter survival in mind. These humble dwellings incorporated clever design features that maximized heat retention and minimized exposure to the elements. Most peasant houses featured a central hearth, literally a fire pit in the middle of the main room. Unlike later chimney-equipped fireplaces built against walls, this central positioning allowed heat to radiate in all directions. Smoke escaped through a hole in the roof, though much of it lingered inside, creating a sooty but relatively warmer environment. The smoke had an unintended benefit. It helped preserve the wooden beams and thatch by discouraging insects and preventing rot. Speaking of thatch, those iconic straw roofs weren't just picturesque, they were excellent insulators. A properly constructed thatch roof could be up to a foot thick, trapping air pockets that provided natural insulation. Thatch was waterproof when well maintained and lasted for decades. Snow on a thatch roof actually added an extra insulation layer, so medieval peasants didn't rush to clear it off. Wall construction varied by region based on available materials. In wooded areas, timber frames with wattle and daub, a mixture of clay, straw, and manure plastered over a woven lattice of wooden strips, created surprisingly effective insulation. In stonier regions, thick stone walls with packed earth or moss between the stones kept out drafts. Many peasants banked soil or manure against the exterior walls of their homes for added insulation, unappealing by modern standards but thermally effective. Windows were tiny or non-existent. The few that existed might be covered with oiled parchment, animal bladders, or wooden shutters. Glass was far too expensive for peasant homes. Some houses featured sleeping platforms built above the animal quarters, taking advantage of the rising heat from the livestock below. Houses were often oriented to maximize southern exposure for solar gain in winter while protecting against prevailing winter winds. Entries might feature a turn or barrier to prevent wind from blowing directly into the living space when the door opened. Number 8, they became human hibernators. When winter descended on medieval Europe, peasants didn't just change how they dressed, they fundamentally altered how they lived. Their daily rhythms and activities transformed in ways that mimicked hibernation, conserving precious energy and resources. Daylight became a scarce and valuable commodity. With no affordable artificial lighting beyond smoky tallow candles or rushlights, dried reeds dipped in animal fat, most peasants synchronized their waking hours with the sun. They rose at dawn and went to bed not long after sunset, sometimes spending up to 14 hours in bed during the depths of winter. This wasn't laziness, it was energy conservation. Staying active in the cold burned precious calories, while huddling under blankets preserved body heat. Work slowed dramatically but didn't stop entirely. The agricultural calendar shifted from the frantic pace of growing seasons to indoor tasks performed close to the fire. Women spun wool, wove fabric, and repaired clothing. Men crafted or repaired tools, made wooden implements, and maintained equipment. Children helped with indoor chores or collected firewood. Movement became more deliberate. Medieval peasants limited unnecessary trips outdoors, combining errands and tasks when possible. Communities organized collective activities to reduce the need for multiple fires. Women might gather to spin yarn together in one heated space rather than working separately in multiple cold homes. Food consumption patterns changed too. Many peasants consciously ate more in winter when available. The extra body fat provided insulation and energy reserves for the cold months. Meals tended to be served hot, often in the form of pottage, a thick soup or stew that had been simmering all day, providing both nutrition and a source of heat when consumed. Social activities centered around the hearth. Storytelling, singing, and simple games occupied the long winter evenings. Multiple generations shared not just body warmth but also knowledge, with elders passing down tales, skills, and community history during these indoor gatherings. Number 7, they fueled up with high-calorie winter foods. Medieval peasants didn't count calories, they maximized them. Their winter diet looked nothing like modern health food, but it kept them alive through brutal winters when staying warm required serious energy. Porridge formed the backbone of the winter peasant diet. Made from whatever grain was available, oats in northern regions, barley or rye in others, it provided complex carbohydrates that released energy slowly throughout the day. Peasants didn't serve it plain. They enriched their porridge with whatever fats were available, butter if they were lucky, animal fat drippings if they weren't. A breakfast of hot, fatty porridge provided the caloric energy needed for the body to generate heat. Bread remained a staple year-round, but winter breads were heartier and denser. Rye bread, a medieval cold weather staple in Central and Northern Europe, kept for weeks without spoiling. Its slightly sour flavor came from fermentation that made its nutrients more bioavailable. Medieval food science at work. Peasants often ate bread with drippings or fat when available, adding crucial calories. Preserved meats played a central role in winter nutrition. Fall slaughtering, often called Martinmas slaughter as it frequently occurred around St. Martin's Day in November, produced meat that was salted, dried, or smoked for winter consumption. Nothing was wasted. Blood became sausages, organs were consumed first before they could spoil, bones flavored broths and stews. Even humble peasants might have bacon or salt pork stored away for winter, using small amounts to flavor their otherwise plant-based meals. Root vegetables like turnips, parsnips, and carrots stored well in cool, dry conditions and featured prominently in winter stews. These vegetables provided essential nutrients while their high fiber content helped peasants feel full. Cabbage, preserved as sauerkraut through fermentation, delivered vitamin C and prevented scurvy during the months when fresh produce was unavailable. Dried fruits, nuts, and berries collected during summer and fall provided concentrated energy and essential nutrients. Peasants gathered beechnuts, hazelnuts, acorns, and chestnuts in the fall, storing them for winter consumption. These calorie-dense foods could be eaten as is or ground into meal to extend flour supplies. Alcohol wasn't just for celebration, it served as both calories and comfort during the coldest months. Ale, with its carbohydrates and B vitamins, was safer than water in many places and provided liquid bread-like nutrition. Mulled wine or ale, heated with spices when available, warmed both body and spirit during the darkest days of winter. Number 6, they used weird but effective heating hacks. Without modern heating technology, medieval peasants got creative with warming methods that ranged from ingenious to downright strange by modern standards. Bed warming took priority because a cold bed could mean a miserable night or even death during severe cold snaps. The bed warmer, a metal pan with a long handle filled with hot coals, was too expensive for most peasants. Instead, they heated stones in the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and placed them in beds before sleeping. These stones released heat gradually throughout the night. Households with access to copper or brass might use bottles filled with hot water, the medieval predecessor to our hot water bottles. Some regions used bed curtains to create a microclimate around sleeping areas. These weren't the elegant four-poster arrangements of the wealthy but simple cloth hangings that trapped body heat in a smaller space. Even humble homes might suspend fabric from the ceiling around sleeping areas during the coldest months. Foot warming received special attention since cold extremities could lead to serious health problems. Foot stoves, small wooden boxes with perforated tops and metal containers for hot coals inside, allowed people to keep their feet warm while sitting for extended periods. Peasants without proper foot stoves might use ceramic containers filled with hot embers, wrapped in fabric, and placed under tables where multiple people could benefit. Some peasant homes featured warming shelves or recesses built into the walls near the hearth. These served as spaces to warm clothing before wearing it, dry wet garments, or even warm food without cooking it further. The clever positioning used heat that would otherwise simply escape up the chimney or through the roof. Medieval peasants optimized their home layout for warmth. Food preparation and other activities happened close to the fire. In multi-room homes, families might abandon outer rooms entirely during the coldest months, living in a single heated space. They hung fabrics on walls not as decorations but as additional insulation layers that trapped air between the cloth and the cold stone or wattle. Animals served as living heating systems. Beyond bringing livestock indoors, some peasants took this strategy further. In parts of Europe, particularly the Alps and other mountainous regions, certain homes were built with the animal quarters directly beneath the human living space, allowing the animal heat to rise through the floorboards and warm the home above. Number 5, they created microclimates inside their homes. Medieval peasants couldn't heat their entire homes evenly, so they engineered warm zones within otherwise cold dwellings. These microclimates allowed them to concentrate heat where they needed it most. The hearth naturally created the primary warm zone in any peasant home. Rather than trying to distribute this heat throughout the dwelling, families arranged their indoor activities around this heat source. Cooking, eating, handcrafts, and socializing all happened within the hearth's radiant circle. During the day, a semicircle of activity surrounded the fire, with people rotating positions to share the warmth. Ingenious heat reflectors amplified the hearth's effectiveness. Peasants positioned large stones or clay bricks near the fire where they would absorb heat during peak burning times. These thermal masses then radiated warmth back hours later as the fire died down. Some homes had built-in brick or stone benches near the hearth that served this purpose. In regions where metal was more available, hammered bronze or copper sheets might be positioned behind the fire to reflect heat back into the room. Homes weren't heated uniformly. Instead, peasants created heat islands where family members could rotate for warming up before returning to cooler tasks. The notion of heating empty spaces would have seemed wasteful. Areas farthest from the hearth might freeze entirely during the coldest nights, with water left in containers turning to ice. Kitchens, when separate from the main living area, often became the heart of winter activity precisely because food preparation generated extra heat. Cooking fires or ovens could keep these spaces substantially warmer than the rest of the dwelling. In homes with baking ovens, bread-making days warmed the entire structure as the massive brick or clay ovens absorbed and slowly released heat over many hours. Sleeping areas featured their own microclimates. Beds were often built into wall recesses or corners to minimize exposure to drafts. Bed curtains, even simple ones made from worn fabric or skins, created a human-sized space that could be warmed by body heat alone. Some regions used bed closets, sleeping spaces with wooden enclosures that functioned like built-in furniture, to create an insulated sleep environment. Layering extended beyond clothing to the living environment itself. Rush matting on floors provided insulation from the cold ground. Wall hangings, originally practical rather than decorative, blocked drafts from seeping through cracks. Families might hang additional fabric layers or skins during the coldest months, creating air pockets that provided extra insulation. Number 4, they became winter weather forecasters. Long before meteorologists and weather apps, medieval peasants developed sophisticated systems for predicting winter severity. Their survival depended on accurate forecasting, not for convenience but for life or death preparation. Animal behavior served as nature's earliest warning system. Squirrels gathering more nuts than usual, birds migrating earlier, or beavers building thicker dams all signaled a harsh winter ahead. Peasants observed that rabbits and foxes growing thicker fur early in the fall often preceded particularly cold seasons. They noticed that when pigs gathered extra bedding material, severe weather usually followed within weeks. Plant signs were equally important. Unusually thick onion skins, heavy acorn production, or berries growing in abundant clusters were all interpreted as nature's warning of a difficult winter ahead. Folklore held that a heavy berry crop on holly and hawthorn predicted significant snowfall. These observations weren't mere superstition, they reflected genuine ecological responses to changing weather patterns. The timing of first frosts, the direction of prevailing winds, and the behavior of morning mist all contributed to peasants' winter predictions. In many regions, the first 12 days of August were believed to foretell the weather of the 12 months ahead, with careful observers noting temperature, precipitation, and sky conditions. Similarly, the weather on specific saints' days was thought to predict winter conditions. Arthritis and old injuries that ached before weather changes turned some elderly villagers into living barometers. Communities relied on these human weather stations, whose bodily pains often preceded storms by a day or more. The collective memory of elders who had survived multiple harsh winters provided context for interpreting signs. When I've seen squirrels like this before, an elder might say, "We've had snow past my knee by Christmas." Moon halos, rings around the moon caused by ice crystals in the upper atmosphere, were known to precede storms. The old saying, "Ring around the moon, rain or snow soon," actually had meteorological validity. Peasants could roughly calculate how soon precipitation would arrive by counting the stars visible within the halo. These forecasting methods weren't perfect, but they allowed communities to prepare. Extra firewood would be gathered, repairs to roofs and walls prioritized, additional food preservation undertaken, and vulnerable livestock brought closer to the settlement. The ability to anticipate particularly harsh winters even by a few weeks could mean the difference between survival and starvation for medieval communities. Number 3, they became masters of food preservation. Summer's abundance became winter's lifeline through preservation techniques that medieval peasants perfected over generations. Without refrigeration, they developed multiple methods to keep food edible through the hungry months. Salt preservation reigned supreme where salt was available. Fish, meat, and even some vegetables could be treated with salt to extract moisture and prevent bacterial growth. In coastal regions, sea salt was produced by evaporating seawater. Inland communities often paid dearly for salt transported from mines or coastal saltworks. The precious mineral was so valuable that the word salary derives from the Latin salarium, the money paid to Roman soldiers to buy salt. Smoking extended the life of meat and fish by exposing them to wood smoke, which acted as both a preservative and a flavoring agent. Hams, bacon, fish, and sausages hung from cottage rafters where they absorbed the preservative compounds in smoke rising from the hearth. This process created a protective outer layer while slowly drying the food, making it inhospitable to bacteria. Many peasant homes had a smoky atmosphere all winter, which wasn't just an unfortunate side effect of poor ventilation but a deliberate food preservation environment. Fermentation transformed perishable foods into long-lasting nutrition. Cabbage became sauerkraut through lactofermentation in salt brine. This preserved the vegetable and actually increased its vitamin C content, crucial for preventing scurvy during winter months when fresh produce was unavailable. Milk became cheese and butter, extending its usefulness for months. Some regions fermented fish in whey or brine, creating strongly flavored but nourishing winter protein sources. Root cellars and clamps kept vegetables fresh through winter. Root cellars, underground storage spaces that maintained cool, stable temperatures, preserved apples, turnips, carrots, and other produce. Where proper root cellars weren't possible, peasants created clamps by digging shallow trenches, lining them with straw, adding vegetables in a conical pile, covering them with more straw, and finally topping with soil. These makeshift root cellars protected food from freezing while maintaining humidity and temperatures around 35 to 40 F, 2 to 40 C. Drying was perhaps the most accessible preservation method for poor peasants. Mushrooms, fruits, herbs, and even thin slices of meat or fish could be dried by simple exposure to air. Strings of apple rings, pears, and berries hung near the rafters. Dry herbs suspended near the hearth provided both winter flavoring and medicinal remedies. Storage of dried foods required protection from moisture and pests, with clay pots, wooden boxes, or fabric sacks serving as containers. Honey, when available, served as both sweetener and preservative. Fruits preserved in honey remained edible for months. The high sugar content created an environment where bacteria couldn't survive. Though expensive, honey was sometimes worth the investment for preserving particularly valuable foods. Number 2, they winterized their bodies. Medieval peasants didn't just adapt their environments to winter, they adapted their bodies too. Through deliberate habituation and lifestyle practices, they developed physical resilience to cold that most modern people would find astonishing. Cold adaptation began in childhood. Medieval children weren't excessively bundled up by today's standards. They played outdoors in cold weather, developing natural brown fat tissue, a special type of fat that burns calories specifically to generate heat rather than store energy. This physiological adaptation helped them maintain core temperature in cold environments. By adulthood, peasants had developed significant cold tolerance through years of exposure. Contrast bathing functioned as a form of physical training for winter resilience. In many regions, particularly Scandinavia and Eastern Europe, people deliberately exposed themselves to extreme temperature contrasts. The practice of winter swimming, followed by warming in steam baths or saunas, had practical benefits beyond cleanliness. Regular exposure to these temperature extremes improved circulation and cold tolerance by training blood vessels to constrict and dilate efficiently. Medieval peasants maintained higher levels of physical activity than many modern people. Working the land required constant movement that generated body heat. Even in winter, daily chores like chopping wood, tending animals, or walking to gather water kept the metabolism fired up. This activity, combined with their generally leaner physiques from manual labor, created efficient internal heating systems. Breath control techniques appear in various medieval records. Certain breathing patterns, what we might now call controlled hyperventilation, were used to generate internal heat when needed. These techniques bear similarities to tummo meditation practices still used by Tibetan monks who can raise their body temperatures in extreme cold. Seasonal dietary adjustments weren't just about available foods, but also about deliberately changing metabolism. Fall feasting when food was abundant wasn't mere indulgence, it was strategic calorie banking and building insulation for the winter ahead. The winter diet typically contained more fat, which provided both insulation when stored as body fat and efficient fuel when consumed during cold weather. Medieval bathing habits changed with the seasons. Contrary to popular belief, medieval people did bathe, but they reduced full body washing during winter months. This preserved the natural oils in skin and hair that provided some water resistance and insulation. What might seem unhygienic to modern sensibilities was actually an adaptation that protected skin from chapping and reduced heat loss during washing in cold environments. Number 1, they built winter-ready communities. The harsh reality of medieval winters shaped not just individual survival strategies but entire community structures. Villages and towns developed communal approaches to cold weather that distributed resources and responsibilities in ways that kept everyone alive. Winter work parties tackled major tasks collectively rather than individually. Firewood gathering, in particular, became a community affair. Groups would venture into forests together, allowing for greater efficiency and safety. Some members would fell trees, while others cut logs to size. The strongest would carry, while others dragged wood on sleds. This division of labor meant even the elderly could contribute by bundling smaller sticks while benefiting from the community's collected resources. Food sharing networks activated during the harshest periods. Families with surplus root vegetables might trade with neighbors who had preserved meat. This informal insurance system recognized that different preservation methods might fail in different households. If someone's stored grain developed mold or their salt meat spoiled, community sharing prevented starvation. Wealthier peasants sometimes held hunger dinners during the hungry gap of late winter when food stores ran low, sharing their remaining resources with poorer neighbors. Communal baking schedules maximized fuel efficiency. Rather than each household maintaining separate baking fires, communities developed rotation systems where the village oven would be fired up on specific days and multiple families would bring their dough for baking. This saved precious fuel and created opportunities for social interaction during the isolated winter months. Snow clearing became a shared responsibility in medieval communities. Pathways between critical buildings, the mill, the church, the village well, were kept passable through collective effort. In some regions, designated snow wardens organized these clearing efforts, ensuring no household was completely cut off during heavy snowfalls. The paths weren't cleared to the ground as we might expect today, but packed down to create solid walking surfaces. Winter watch systems developed in many villages. During particularly severe weather, community members would take turns checking on the most vulnerable households, the elderly, the ill, or those with new babies. These informal well-being checks ensured that if a fire went out or a roof collapsed under snow, help would arrive quickly. Knowledge sharing happened around winter hearths. Communities preserved critical survival information through oral tradition, passing down weather predictions, preservation techniques, and cold weather remedies through stories and direct instruction. Children learned which plants could be gathered even in snow for emergency medicine, and which barks could be stripped for emergency fuel when wood ran low. And when all else failed, medieval communities had one final resource: the church. Monasteries and parish churches often maintained emergency food stores specifically for winter crises. The medieval Christian obligation to care for the poor meant that church buildings sometimes became emergency shelters during the worst weather, with their stone walls and larger hearths providing refuge when peasant homes became uninhabitable. How much of this medieval winter wisdom have we lost over centuries of technological progress? Could some of these forgotten techniques help us weather the climate uncertainty of our own future?